Hello, everyone. We are tuning in live from Egypt, from the Alexandra Library, and today is the start of the Climathon Global Stage 2022. During this session, I will be connecting with a special Climathon organizer that developed a new concept for Climathon to be focused in rural areas. She is Filipa, and I would like to welcome her on the stage.
Hi, Samantha.
Hi, Filipa. Welcome to the Climathon Global Stage 2022. As you know, we are kickstarting the Global Climathon celebration this year, and we are live from Egypt, being hosted by the Alexandra Library. And we are so thrilled to connect with you because you have a special and a different experience on what is it to run a Climathon in a different way. You are tuning live from England, and please introduce yourself and introduce what kind of Climathons you were running this year.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you very much for having me, Samantha and team. So my name is Philippa Simmons. I'm a researcher based at the University of Gloucestershire in England. And the approach that we took in spring this year was to run 2 Climathons in rural communities, one in the north of England and one in the south of England. We focused specifically on net zero solutions relating to food and farming.
That sounds exciting. So what was different about your Climathons?
So I think the major difference was the scale. So they were obviously a lot smaller than some of the huge events that other local organizers are organizing. We had to pay a lot of attention to culture on a very local level and to the existing networks going on at the local level that we as sort of outsiders to them perhaps were, had to learn very quickly. And we were also dealing with quite a contentious topic with people who had a real stake in it. So the future of food and farming is very topical and sometimes can be quite contested. And we were working with people who in some way were involved in land use or were farmers and smallholders. So that was a little bit interesting about these events, I suppose.
Well, I would like to hear a little bit more about your experience in depth. And I think that you have prepared some insights for that. But first, I want to give audiences a clear picture of who was part of this Climathon, when it happened, and where in England it happened. Could you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So our first event took place in the Eden Valley, which is in Cumbria, a county in the north of England that's next to 2 quite hilly and mountainous regions, but sort of sandwiched in the middle of them. And it's a place where there's a lot of livestock farming and particularly dairy farming. So the people who attended were mostly in a sort of older age demographic. That was who was able to attend because we ran it on a weekday. And there were people who tended to already have some interest in food, farming, or sustainability. The second event was in Bude, which is at the other end of the country in Cornwall. So it's on the coast, and it's one of the places in the UK that is most vulnerable to sea level rise. And we worked with local partners there, and we chose there to run the event. You'll see shortly, the first event was run. The venue was in fact a shed on a farm. But in this place, we ran it in a hotel and had a slightly different focus, a bit more around the local food economy and things like that.
Well, we want to hear a little bit more about this particular experience. I think it's the first time that we have a Climathon maker developing a particular methodology and really focusing and going deep into how to bring Climathon to a rural community with a specific environment, with a specific, geography and demographics. So I would let you present to us what were your learnings from being the Climathon maker in these 2 rural places.
Perfect, thank you. I will just share my screen.
Thank you. We can see your screens right now. So if you go to presentation mode, then we would love to hear more in depth.
Perfect. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so a real focus of our approach was the sort of deliberative aspect of the Climathon, so the way that it can bring people together to talk to each other. And that's what we really tried to highlight with this project. So as I've sort of mentioned, rural land use, food and farming is quite a difficult subject, especially in the UK, where we have a strong farming heritage. And there's various recommendations that have come out by different bodies saying that we need to do things like increasing forest cover, increasing tree planting, reducing meat consumption, and investing in alternative proteins. And all of this can sometimes be at odds with different goals in terms of biodiversity and preserving farming heritage and our cultural landscapes. So we knew that it wasn't impossible. We knew that Climathons had been done in rural communities before, and we were fortunate to link up with some colleagues who had run one in France, which was very helpful. And these are the posters for the two events we hosted. So one, as you can see, in the Eden Valley on the left, in this northern, more hilly region, and on the right in Bude, down in Cornwall, in the sort of coastal region. This shows our rural Climathon playbook, which I will talk through. Please don't try to read it all on the slide. It's all available on the web page that we've produced to summarize the project, which you can access via our Twitter. So the first big thing for us was this consortium building. So really building trust with our local partners, getting to know the local networks, and making sure that we had the right people in the room. And our big learning was that we mustn't underestimate the time and energy to dedicate to that in order to run a successful event. So I think that's particularly vital for rural settings. And because we were remote from the settings, we needed to use online methods, but also visit in person. And the picture here, you'll see this is the venue for our first Climathon a few weeks before we attended. So a very multifunctional space. Secondly, we wanted to make sure the events aligned with local initiatives. So we weren't coming in as outsiders to do something that had already been done. And we weren't going to undermine the existing work that was going on. So the goal was that this project would really enhance what people were already doing, because there were strong climate networks in both places. We also used some creative approaches, which I'll show you. So, for example, we used digital storytelling to make sure that farmer voices were in the room. It was very challenging for farmers to attend the full day event, just because of the sheer cost of spending a full day off of the farm. So we used this method so that they were recorded and speaking in their own voices about their farming stories and their experiences with sustainability and net zero. We also hired live illustrators who sat and recorded the discussions during the day and the solutions that came out of them. So here, for example, you can see we talked about on-farm renewables. That was up in the top left. We talk about composting farmyard manure. And there was also a project that was about hedge planting in the Eden Valley, with a grand target to get funding to plant hundreds of kilometers of new hedgerows to sequester carbon. In Bude, we had a lot more focus on the local food system and on finding routes to market for sustainable products. So that was very interesting. But in both settings, there was a team that worked on a project that was to do with farmer peer-to-peer learning. So farmers learning from each other about net zero and the different solutions that they might come up with. I'll move on quickly. We used a streamlined structure. So we had a hybrid format with an initial webinar followed by the full day in-person event. And we tried to keep it farmer and family friendly so that it would be okay for people to be able to attend if they needed to get away to pick up children from school or to deal with livestock and things like that. We tried to serve really nice food at the event. That was very important for attracting people and making sure that it was worth their while to come along. And we were able to incorporate outdoor activities, and this was particularly to make the event farmer friendly. We were told that people would not want to sit indoors all day, basically. So we had these walks where we went to see different net zero solutions in the local area. And that gave a lot of space for informal discussions between the teams, ideas to be bounced off one another, and it helped to energize people after they'd been sitting still for a long time. We also, as I mentioned at the beginning, we were interested in the collaborative approaches and the more deliberative nature of the event. So we used a lot of facilitation strategies, including setting some ground rules at the beginning of the day to make sure that if there were disagreements, this could be dealt with in a spirit of understanding and respect for difference. So we didn't have a competition at the end. Everyone presented their results and received feedback from the other teams. We didn't declare a winner at the end of the two events. The main challenges we faced were farmer engagement, as I mentioned. It was particularly due to the busy workloads that they had, coordinating things remotely, as I've suggested, and also making sure that we maintain these ground rules when we moved out of the main space of the Climathon and into the fields, for example. It gave us a great opportunity to build on the strong existing work that was happening in both communities. The in-person events were really valued by people, particularly after having had a lot of sessions online during the pandemic. And we found that the creative and the experiential components of it were really added to the event and made it very memorable and enjoyable for participants. So the main points was that the event helped to localize the net zero agenda, which in the UK is very much considered at a sort of national level, and it brought it down to the local level. It helped to deepen participation, so people who were already interested in food and farming and net zero made new connections, got a better understanding of different solutions, while it didn't necessarily bring in new voices who had never talked about any of this before, for example. We really emphasized that time and local expertise are absolutely vital to a successful event. And it's important the solutions that were generated were linked to specific outcomes. So we worked with participants afterwards to develop roadmaps that might help them to see how these solutions could be taken forward. A couple of them are now seeking funding, and there's one team who already had funding for a project on on-farm renewables, which the work they did at the Climathon has helped to feed into that and help them to understand the landscape relating to that project.
Thank you, Filipa.
Thank you.
Please tell us how we can contact this project and your organization.
Absolutely. So you can email myself. That's my email there. And then my supervisor is Damien May, and that's his email. He led the project. That's the website where you can find the sort of all the information, but you can also just check our Twitter, which is @Rural Climathons, and everything is linked from there. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Filipa. This is an amazing experience, and we thank you so much for taking the time to bring Climathon to the rural communities. I have a question for you. What was the solution that stuck most with you? What were you most surprised about from one or the other of both events?
I think the fact that the peer-to-peer learning came up in both events, so trying to facilitate farmers talking to each other rather than people coming along and telling them what to do, I think that was really interesting. There's a lot of knowledge within the farming community, and it's how we can best facilitate that to be shared and advanced.
Great. And what about the solutions? What were the solutions that you think that they have a future and they will, perhaps flourish in the local community?
So the project I mentioned that being taken forward on-farm renewables, I think is very interesting because it shows some of the opportunities and the challenges. There's obviously a lot of big farm buildings that have space for solar panels, for example. There's potential for wind turbines. There's a lot that could be done. However, grid connectivity is a real challenge, especially in remote settings. So there's a lot of work that has to be done with power companies to ensure that these places are connected so they can make the most of the resources they have.
And what did you experience about the local, climate behaviors? Like, how do they see climate change in these two rural areas? How do they take on the conversation on developing solutions for a climate impact, a positive climate impact?
we found that people were very engaged on the topic, and there were already networks existing. One was the Bude Climate Partnership, who we worked with, and the other was the Zero Carbon Cumbria collective, who worked together on that. And we found that people were engaged, and they also are very much experiencing the effects of climate change already. People who are working on the land are experiencing the changing weather, the changing temperatures. So it was very much something that they were on board with talking about from the start.
Yeah, and talking about people's experience and how they are looking at, the developing the climate solutions and climate ideas and connecting, with the overall conversation and the overall climate action. I have a question for you, and this is, what kind of future do you imagine for becoming a climate resilient society?
So I think that what's fundamental to becoming a climate resilient society is citizen involvement in climate policy. And I think using deliberative approaches where citizens can have a voice in policy making is absolutely essential. And I think there's some very exciting work going on that topic in different countries. And I'm hoping that's something that we'll see continuing in the years to come.
Thank you so much, Filipa. We hope to see you back again for Climathon 2023 and hosting more Climathons in rural communities in more places in England. We have learned so much about the new methodology approach and localizing Climathon to these rural areas. It has been a pleasure to hear about your experience and to have your insights. Please, if you're interested in co-organizing or supporting the Climathon in rural communities in England, connect with Filipa to the email that she already provided. We will write it down in the comments chat and help her expand Climathon in rural communities in England. Thank you so much, Filipa. We look forward to see you again next year.
Thanks very much for having me, Samantha. Enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in live for our second Climathon check-in with a Climathon maker from all over the world. We are going to see you soon for the next check-in. Stay tuned.